office late at night, staring at my phone. The notification had just pinged. Your necklace sold successfully for $950,000. My heart pounded as disbelief washed over me. The problem? I never put it up for sale. That necklace, passed down through 4 generations of women in my family, was supposed to be locked in our bedroom safe. My husband Grant was asleep upstairs, or so I thought. The auction house confirmation showed his name as the seller. What he didn't know was that I'd been plotting this moment for weeks, waiting for him to make his move. To understand how we got here, I need to go back to the beginning. Grant and I had what everyone called the perfect marriage. 8 years together, both of us climbing our respective career ladders in Atlanta's business district. He ran his consulting firm from the converted garage behind our Tudor-style house in Virginia Highland. I managed marketing campaigns for Fortune 500 companies from my corner office downtown. Weekend dinner parties, joint checking accounts, shared passwords on everything, the kind of transparency that made our friends joke about us being attached at the hip. The necklace sat in our bedroom safe, a Mosler from the 1940s that weighed 200 pounds and required 2 people to move. Grant had helped me install it when we bought the house. The combination was our wedding anniversary, something we'd chosen together because it felt romantic at the time. Inside that safe, wrapped in the original silk from my great-grandmother's wedding dress, was a piece that had survived 4 generations of Chen women. Chen is my maiden name. My great-grandmother Li had sewn the first pearls onto a simple gold chain in 1924, working as a seamstress in San Francisco's Chinatown. My grandmother added the jade centerpiece in 1952 after opening her first restaurant, and my mother contributed the surrounding diamonds in 1981, celebrating her first year as a practicing physician in America. Each generation had added their mark to create the intricate design that made it worth close to $1 million today. I'd always planned to add my own element when I had a daughter, continuing the tradition. The necklace represented more than money. It was proof that Chen women survived, adapted, and thrived, no matter what obstacles they faced. 3 months ago, things started shifting. Grant began asking casual questions about our insurance coverage, whether we should increase the limits on valuable items, suggesting we document everything more thoroughly. I'd find him looking at the safe sometimes when he thought I wasn't watching, running his fingers along the edges like he was memorizing the mechanism. His consulting business had been struggling since the pandemic. Clients were cutting budgets, delaying projects. I knew money was tight, but Grant handled our finances and assured me we were fine. I was pulling 60-hour weeks launching a campaign for a new automotive client, traveling to Detroit twice a month. I trusted him to manage things at home. The phone calls started around the same time. Grant would take them in the garage office, speaking in low tones I couldn't make out through the walls. When I'd ask who called, he'd say potential clients or vendors. Nothing specific, nothing memorable. His phone stayed face down during meals, something he'd never done before. My grandmother used to say that Chen women inherited more than jewelry. We got instincts about people's intentions, the ability to sense when someone was planning something they shouldn't. She'd tap her temple and tell me to trust what I felt, not just what I heard. Growing up, I'd thought it was superstition, cultural folklore passed down to make us feel special. But sitting at our kitchen table on a Tuesday morning in March, watching Grant carefully ask whether the necklace's appraisal was current, I felt something cold settle in my stomach. His tone was too casual, his interest too sudden. He'd never cared about appraisals before. I found myself studying him differently after that. The way he'd pause before answering simple questions about his day. How he'd change the subject whenever I mentioned upcoming travel for work. Small behavioral shifts that individually meant nothing but together formed a pattern I couldn't ignore. Grant had become secretive about money in ways that went beyond normal financial privacy. He'd moved his laptop to his office, password-protected files he used to leave open, started handling all our banking online instead of leaving statements on the kitchen counter. When I'd ask about our accounts, he'd give vague reassurances about everything being fine. The morning I found him photographing our safe's serial number, claiming he needed it for insurance purposes, my grandmother's voice echoed in my head. Trust what you feel, not what you hear. But I chose to trust my husband over my instincts, convincing myself that 8 years of marriage meant more than a few months of strange behavior. That decision would prove to be my biggest mistake. The questions became more pointed and systematic after that morning. Grant would wait until I was cooking dinner or folding laundry, times when my hands were busy and the conversation felt casual. He'd ask about the necklace's current market value, whether I'd had it reappraised recently, which company had done the work, whether they'd photographed each component separately. When I mentioned the last appraisal was from 2019, he suggested we should update it for insurance purposes. I started paying attention to our shared laptop after Grant left it open one Tuesday evening. The browser history told the real story. Searches for Sotheby's jewelry auctions, Christie's authentication requirements, consignment jewelry specialists in Atlanta. He'd researched the difference between auction houses and estate sale companies, looked up articles about selling inherited jewelry without co-owner signatures. The timestamps showed he'd been doing this research during my business trips to Detroit, using the laptop late at night when he thought I was asleep upstairs. The meetings started while I was traveling for the automotive campaign launch. Grant mentioned casually that our insurance agent wanted to do a home assessment, update our coverage limits. He scheduled it for Thursday afternoon while I was in Detroit meeting with clients. When I got home Friday night, he showed me paperwork from Modern Insurance Solutions, a company I'd never heard of. The documentation looked professional, but something felt wrong about the timing. Grant had never handled insurance matters before. I found the photographs 3 weeks later while Grant was in the shower. His phone was charging on the kitchen counter when a text notification came through from someone named David about documentation complete. I scrolled through his photo gallery and found dozens of images of my necklace, taken from every angle against a white background. Professional lighting, macro shots of individual pearls, the jade centerpiece, each diamond setting. The kind of detailed photography auction houses require for authentication. Grant had been in our bedroom safe. He'd removed my necklace and photographed it like merchandise while I was at work. The metadata showed the photos were taken over several different days, always during business hours when my calendar showed client meetings downtown. He'd been systematically documenting every component, creating the kind of comprehensive visual record that serious buyers demand. The conversations made sense now. Grant had been extracting information about the safe combination by asking seemingly innocent questions about our anniversary date, whether we'd ever consider changing it to something more secure. He'd memorized my travel schedule by asking about my Detroit trips, when I'd be flying out, whether I'd be working late at the hotel. Every casual question had been gathering intelligence for his plan. I started checking his phone more carefully, found email exchanges with 3 different auction houses. Grant had submitted preliminary inquiries about selling family jewelry worth approximately $1 million. He'd created fake documentation suggesting I was aware of the sale, forged my signature on inquiry forms, claiming we needed to liquidate assets due to business difficulties. The paperwork showed he'd been practicing my signature, getting the loops and angles right. The most damaging evidence was a draft email to Heritage Auctions. Grant had written that his wife supported selling her grandmother's necklace to cover unexpected medical expenses. He'd created an entire fictional narrative about my supposed agreement to the sale. The email referenced conversations we'd never had, decisions I'd never made. He'd built a paper trail suggesting I was a willing participant in selling my family's legacy. I printed everything while he was at the gym. Screenshots of browser history, photos of the forged documents, copies of his email exchanges with auction houses. The evidence filled a manila folder I hid in my office filing cabinet under corporate marketing materials. Each piece of documentation showed months of calculated deception. Grant hadn't stumbled into this betrayal. He'd planned it methodically, step by step. The hardest part was acting normal during dinner conversations. Grant would mention his day, complain about difficult clients, ask about my campaigns. I'd respond appropriately while knowing he'd spent his afternoon researching jewelry authentication or practicing my signature. He'd kiss me goodnight while planning to steal the most precious thing my family owned. My grandmother had taught me that when someone shows you their true intentions, believe them the first time. Don't give them chances to create better lies. Grant had shown me exactly who he was. Now I needed to decide what to do with that information. I could stop him immediately or let him proceed while building my own case. The choice would determine whether this betrayal destroyed me or whether I turned it into his downfall. I made my decision that night, sitting in my home office with the folder of evidence spread across my desk. If Grant wanted to play games with my family's legacy, I'd make sure he understood the rules. The next morning, I set my plan in motion with two strategic moves that would give Grant enough rope to hang himself. First, I hired Elena Vasquez, a private investigator who specialized in financial fraud cases. She'd built her reputation documenting cheating spouses, but had expanded into white-collar crime. Elena set up surveillance on Grant while I traveled for work, discovering he was meeting regularly with a gambling addiction counselor in Marietta and visiting underground Atlanta casino 3 times a week. The debt was worse than I'd imagined. Grant owed $127,000 to various creditors, including $43,000 to a bookie named Tommy Castellano who'd been making threatening phone calls. Second, I drove to Buckhead and found Masterpiece Replicas, a company that specialized in creating museum-quality reproductions for insurance purposes. The owner, Robert Kim, had worked with major auction houses for 20 years. He examined photos of my necklace and quoted me $3,800 for a replica that would fool casual inspection. Standing in his workshop, surrounded by perfect copies of priceless artifacts, I felt a strange mix of pride and grim determination. My great-grandmother would have understood this kind of calculated survival. The work would take 2 weeks. I paid cash and scheduled delivery for the following Tuesday. I called Heritage Auctions from my office downtown, claiming to be Grant's wife following up on his inquiries. The representative, Jennifer, was helpful, but confused. She said Grant had submitted preliminary paperwork for a $1 million necklace, but hadn't provided the required co-owner documentation. When I explained I was the actual owner and had never agreed to any sale, her tone changed immediately. She transferred me to their fraud prevention department. They'd been suspicious of Grant's forged signatures from the beginning. The handwriting analysis software had flagged discrepancies in my supposed consent forms. My attorney consultations revealed the full scope of what Grant was attempting. Criminal attorney James Morrison explained that selling someone's property without consent constituted theft by conversion, a felony carrying up to 10 years in prison. Divorce attorney Patricia Wells walked me through asset protection strategies. We moved my inheritance money into a trust account Grant couldn't access, changed the beneficiaries on my life insurance policies, documented everything in my family trusts that Grant had no legal claim to. Elena's financial investigation revealed Grant's gambling addiction had been going on for 3 years. He'd been stealing from his own business accounts to cover losses. 2 of his biggest clients had terminated contracts after discovering billing irregularities. The consulting firm was essentially bankrupt. Grant had been using our joint credit cards to fund his casino visits, racking up debt I knew nothing about. I manipulated my travel schedule to give Grant the perfect opportunity. The automotive client wanted to extend my Detroit trip by 3 days for additional strategy sessions. I told Grant I'd be gone from Tuesday through Friday, giving him a 4-day window. I booked a hotel near the airport but actually stayed at my sister's house in Decatur. Elena positioned surveillance equipment around our property and installed software on our home computer that would alert us the moment Grant accessed auction house websites or email accounts. I watched the surveillance footage from Elena's office, seeing Grant practice opening our safe during his lunch breaks. He'd stand there for 20 minutes, memorizing the combination sequence, timing how long it took. The man I'd shared a bed with for 8 years was rehearsing the theft of my family's legacy like it was a business presentation. By Thursday morning, everything was in place. The replica necklace sat in our safe, identical to the original except for the microscopic authentication marks only experts would notice. The real necklace was secured in a bank deposit box downtown. Elena's surveillance team was positioned around our house. Law enforcement was briefed and ready to respond when Grant made his move. Friday afternoon arrived with Grant believing I was 3 states away. The auction house had confirmed his appointment for 2 p.m. I sat in my office, laptop open to the surveillance feeds, watching everything unfold exactly as planned. At 2:47 p.m., the notification arrived while I reviewed quarterly projections with my automotive client. My phone buzzed against the conference table. Heritage Auctions, transaction complete. Item number 4429, sold for $950,000. I excused myself and stepped into the hallway, my heart rate staying perfectly steady as I read the full confirmation. The buyer was a private collector in New York. Payment had been processed. Grant Lake listed as the consigning party. This was my moment of vindication. I forwarded the email to Elena and my attorney, watching 8 years of marriage reduced to a transaction number. Grant walked through our front door at 6:15 p.m. carrying takeout from our favorite Thai restaurant. Pad See Ew for me, green curry for him, spring rolls to share. He kissed my forehead and asked about my day like he'd spent his afternoon reviewing client proposals instead of selling my family's legacy. I watched him unpack the containers, noting how his hands moved with unusual precision. No nervous energy, no guilt in his posture. He believed he'd executed the perfect crime. We ate in comfortable silence for the first 10 minutes. Grant mentioned a difficult client. I responded about budget delays. Normal conversation that felt surreal given what I knew. The recording equipment Elena had installed captured everything. Grant's casual lies about reviewing contracts while the GPS tracker showed his car at Heritage Auctions for 3 hours. His fabricated story about phone calls with potential clients, while the audio surveillance recorded complete silence from his office. I could see the real-time transcripts on my phone as he spoke. Every word documented for the legal proceedings that would follow. I waited until he finished his green curry before mentioning that I'd received an interesting email that afternoon. Something about a jewelry sale. Grant continued eating, asking what kind of sale, his voice carrying mild curiosity but no alarm. He assumed I was talking about marketing emails from department stores. When I said it was from Heritage Auctions, his fork paused halfway to his mouth for exactly 2 seconds before he resumed eating. Grant asked why an auction house would be emailing me. I explained that they'd sent confirmation of a sale involving my necklace. His response came too quickly. He suggested it must be spam or a mistake. Auction houses probably sent mass marketing emails to people with valuable jewelry. His explanation sounded reasonable if you didn't know he'd been corresponding with Heritage Auctions for 6 weeks. I opened my laptop and turned the screen toward him. The sale confirmation filled the display, complete with item photos and transaction details. Grant's name appeared clearly as the consigning party. His signature on the authentication documents. The $950,000 sale price. Grant stared at the screen for nearly 30 seconds without speaking. When he finally looked up, his face had changed completely. The casual confidence disappeared. Grant started talking rapidly about misunderstandings and clerical errors. He said someone must have used his identity fraudulently. Maybe hackers had accessed his information. He'd never been to Heritage Auctions, didn't even know where their Atlanta location was. The explanations poured out in a stream of increasingly desperate denials. I pulled up the surveillance footage on my laptop. Grant standing in our bedroom, opening the safe, removing my necklace, photographing it from multiple angles, placing it carefully in a jewelry box he'd brought specifically for transport. The timestamp showed Tuesday afternoon while I was supposedly in Detroit. Grant watched himself commit the theft in high-definition video. His justifications shifted strategies. The gambling debts were temporary setbacks. He'd planned to pay back every penny before I noticed. The necklace wasn't really being sold, just appraised for insurance purposes. He'd never intended for the transaction to go through. Someone at the auction house had made an error. He'd been trying to protect our financial future by getting proper valuations on our assets. I let him finish his explanations before opening the jewelry box I'd kept hidden in my office filing cabinet. Inside was my great-grandmother's necklace, every pearl and diamond exactly where it belonged. Grant looked from the necklace to the laptop screen showing the sale confirmation. His face went completely white as he realized what he'd actually sold to that private collector in New York. Grant stared at the real necklace for nearly a minute without speaking, his mouth opening and closing like he was trying to form words that wouldn't come. When he finally managed to speak, his voice came out as a whisper asking how long I'd known about his plan. I told him 6 weeks. Since the night I found him researching auction houses on our laptop. Since the morning I discovered the forged signatures with my name. Since Elena's surveillance team started documenting his every move. Detective Rodriguez arrived at 7:30 p.m. with 2 uniformed officers. I'd been coordinating with the Atlanta Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit for 3 weeks, building a case against Grant for theft by conversion, fraud, and forgery. The auction house had provided full cooperation once they realized they'd been duped into selling stolen property. Heritage Auctions faced potential liability for processing the sale without proper documentation. Grant immediately started talking about misunderstandings and mistakes when he saw the officers. He told Detective Rodriguez that married couples sell jewelry all the time, that this was a domestic dispute, not a criminal matter. He'd been trying to help our family's financial situation. The detective let him talk for 5 minutes before explaining that selling someone else's property without consent constitutes felony theft regardless of marriage status. Georgia law doesn't recognize spousal theft exemptions for high-value items. I handed Detective Rodriguez the manila folder containing 6 weeks of documentation. Screenshots of Grant's browser history showing research into jewelry authentication processes. Photos of forged signatures on auction house paperwork. Bank records showing his gambling debts and the money he'd stolen from his own business accounts. Elena's surveillance footage of Grant removing my necklace from our safe and transporting it to Heritage Auctions. Financial records proving the necklace belonged to my family trust, not our marital assets. Grant's demeanor shifted rapidly from denial to negotiation to desperate pleading. He asked whether we could resolve this privately between spouses, suggested counseling or mediation instead of criminal prosecution, promised to pay back every penny he'd lost gambling, said he'd check himself into addiction treatment. Detective Rodriguez explained that I wasn't pressing charges. The state was prosecuting based on the evidence. My cooperation wasn't required for conviction. The financial protection measures I'd implemented over the past month insulated me completely from Grant's debts and schemes. My inheritance money had been moved into an irrevocable trust with my sister as co-trustee. The necklace was formally documented as separate property predating our marriage. I'd changed beneficiaries on life insurance policies and retirement accounts. Grant's gambling debts and business failures couldn't touch any assets I'd inherited from my family. Grant realized he'd gained nothing from months of planning and deception. The $950,000 from selling the replica would be seized as proceeds from fraud. Heritage Auctions was demanding restitution for the embarrassment and potential legal liability. The private collector in New York was filing suit for damages. Grant faced financial ruin on top of criminal prosecution. His final strategy was blaming me for creating an elaborate trap instead of communicating openly about his problems. He said I'd manipulated him into committing crimes by not confronting him directly when I discovered his plans, that a loving wife would have offered help instead of gathering evidence for prosecution. He accused me of being vindictive and calculating, choosing revenge over reconciliation. I reminded Grant that I hadn't forced him to forge my signature or steal my property. Every crime he'd committed was his choice. I'd simply documented his decisions and protected myself from the consequences. Detective Rodriguez placed Grant under arrest at 8:15 p.m. The handcuffs clicked shut while Grant stared at me across our living room. He asked whether I felt satisfied watching his life fall apart, whether destroying our marriage was worth protecting a piece of jewelry. I told him the necklace represented 4 generations of women who'd survived worse betrayals than his. It wasn't just jewelry. It was proof that Chen women endure, adapt, and protect what matters most. Grant broke down completely as the officers led him toward the door, sobbing that he'd never meant for things to go this far. But intentions don't matter when the damage is already done. The legal system would determine his fate now. The trial started 8 weeks later in Fulton County Superior Court. Grant's public defender tried arguing that the sale represented a marital dispute rather than criminal theft. The strategy collapsed within 2 hours of testimony. Judge Patricia Williams reviewed my documentation folder piece by piece, screenshots of Grant's research into jewelry authentication processes, audio recordings of his lies about afternoon meetings while GPS data showed him at heritage auctions, surveillance footage of him photographing my necklace without permission. The evidence timeline stretched across 6 weeks of methodical deception. Grant's claim that I'd consented to the sale fell apart under cross-examination. Prosecutor David Thomas presented the forged signatures alongside handwriting analysis proving Grant had practiced my signature multiple times. The auction house paperwork showed discrepancies that their fraud detection software had flagged immediately. Jennifer Walsh from Heritage Auctions testified that Grant's documentation had raised red flags from the beginning. Legitimate consigners provided joint ownership documentation and appeared together for authentication meetings. Grant had done neither. The judge's reaction was immediate and decisive. She called Grant's actions a calculated betrayal of trust that went far beyond typical marital disputes. Judge Williams emphasized that stealing inherited property represented an attack on family legacy spanning generations. She noted that Grant had shown no remorse during testimony, continuing to blame me for his criminal choices even after conviction. Grant received the maximum sentence of 7 years in state prison plus 5 years probation. The judge ordered restitution of $950,000 plus legal fees and court costs. She explained that the severity of the sentence reflected the premeditated nature of the crime and the sophisticated deception involved. Grant had spent months planning the theft, forging documents, and lying to multiple institutions. This wasn't an impulsive mistake, but a deliberate criminal enterprise. I watched Grant's face as the verdict was read. No emotion, no acknowledgement of what he'd tried to destroy. Even facing 7 years in prison, he seemed more angry than apologetic. His final words to the court were complaints about being trapped by his wife instead of taking responsibility for his choices. The financial consequences extended beyond criminal penalties. The private collector in New York filed civil suit for fraud damages. Grant's consulting business dissolved under the weight of client lawsuits over missing funds. His total liability exceeded $1.2 million with no assets to satisfy the judgments. I started speaking at women's financial empowerment workshops about recognizing warning signs of spousal financial abuse. The behavioral changes I'd noticed in Grant followed patterns other women described: increased secrecy around finances, unusual interest in asset values and insurance documentation, questions about travel schedules and safe combinations. I taught attendees how to document suspicious activities and protect inherited property through legal trusts. The emotional recovery took longer than the legal proceedings. I'd spent 8 years building a life with someone who'd been willing to steal my family's legacy. The betrayal went deeper than money. Grant had been planning to destroy 4 generations of family history to cover his gambling debts. I found a therapist who specialized in financial trauma and worked through the trust issues that lingered after discovering how thoroughly Grant had deceived me. The experience revealed capabilities I hadn't known I possessed. Planning Grant's downfall required patience, strategic thinking, and emotional control I'd never tested before. My grandmother's advice about trusting instincts over words had been correct. The cold feeling I'd experienced watching Grant ask about insurance policies was my subconscious recognizing deception before my rational mind accepted it. 6 months after Grant's conviction, I received a letter from a woman in Phoenix whose husband had attempted similar theft of her mother's engagement ring. She'd followed my documentation methods and caught him before he could complete the sale. Her case resulted in prosecution and divorce proceedings that protected her inherited assets. She thanked me for sharing my story and providing a roadmap for women facing similar betrayals. The necklace sits safely in its deposit box now, waiting for the next generation of Chen women. Sometimes the worst betrayals teach us the most about our own strength, but more importantly, they remind us to listen to the wisdom passed down through generations. Today I check legal documents instead of trusting promises, and that shift in perspective has protected everything my family built. Grant's appeals continue getting denied while I've rebuilt my life around hard evidence rather than blind faith. If you're watching this and have family heirlooms, document everything now and create legal trusts that protect inherited property from dishonest spouses. Watch for behavioral changes around finances and unusual questions about insurance policies. This experience taught me that my grandmother's instincts about survival weren't just cultural wisdom, but practical intelligence. The betrayal that could have destroyed 4 generations of family legacy instead revealed capabilities I never knew I possessed. Sometimes the people closest to us show their true intentions when they think we're not watching, and preparation beats deception every time. Let me know in the comments if you've experienced similar financial betrayal, and subscribe for more stories about turning the tables on deception.